Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to look at another Leaving Cert poem, Chronicle, by David Wheatley. Wheatley was born in Dublin in 1970. He is an Irish poet and critic. He studied at Trinity College Dublin and he is a lecturer at the University of Hull, England. So, what is a chronicle? It's a historical account of events arranged in order of time. Just something to think about before we start the poem. Do you know where your grandparents lived? Did you ever visit that place? Did you have much in common with that place? Stanza 1. My father is chugging along the back roads between Kilcool and Newtown in his van, the first wood-panelled Morris Minor in Wicklow. Evening is draped lazily over the mountains. One hapless midnight, mistaking the garage door for open, he drove right through it, waking my father. So let's look at some of the words in stanza 1. My grandfather is chugging along the back roads. Chugging, a sound made by a tired old engine. And the back roads, the country roads through the Wicklow Mountains, between Kilcool and Newtown in his van. And his grandfather had the first wood-panelled Morris Minor in the whole of County Wicklow here in Ireland. The next part is beautifully described. Evening is draped lazily over the mountains. The poet sees the mountains just like covers of cloth folded like this, and it's a very gentle kind of atmosphere. Evening is draped lazily over the mountains. Now he tells us an interesting story about his grandfather. One hapless midnight, one unlucky midnight, mistaking the garage door for open, he drove right through it, waking my father. So his grandfather sounds like a bit of a character. Stanza 2. The old man never did get to farm like his father, preferring to trundle his taxi along the back roads. Visiting, I stand at his workshop door and try to engage him in small talk, always in vain, then climb the uncarpeted stairs to look at the mountains, hulking over soggy up and down Wicklow. So, the old man never did get to farm like his father, preferring to trundle his taxi along the back roads. So to trundle is to move on wheels. Visiting, I stand in his workshop door and try to engage in small talk. Small talk, light or casual conversation, a chat. But unfortunately, when our poet tries to engage in a chat with the old man, it's always in vain. It's always without success. Then I climb the uncarpeted stairs to look at the mountains, hulking. The mountains are hulking. They're clumsy, awkward, heavy and bulky. They're hulking over soggy up and down Wicklow. Soggy tells us that the land is wet, moist and damp. Up and down Wicklow shows that it's full of mountains. Stanza 3. Cattle, accents and muck. I don't have a clue. I need everything explained to me by my father. Clannish great uncles, somewhere near the mountains, are vaguer still, farming their few poor roods. Encountered at Christmas with wives who serve me oven-baked bread and come to wave us off at the door. So, Stanza 3, the poet is explaining how he really doesn't understand the lives of his grandfather and relatives in the mountains. Cattle, accents and muck. Nothing but cows and strange accents and mud. I don't have a clue because our poet is a city boy. I need everything explained to me by my father. Clannish great uncles. Clannish people, they exclude others outside of the group. They're tribal. They don't really mix with others. Clannish great uncles, somewhere near the mountains, are vaguer still. Vague, unclear and difficult to understand. This poet, who's a city boy, can't understand the accents and lives of his mountainy relatives. Farming their few poor roods. They're not rich, their relatives. They only have a few poor roods. A roods is 0.25 of an acre, a measurement of land. Encountered at Christmas with wives who serve me oven-baked bread. So he meets them only at Christmas, and the wives of these uncles and great uncles that live in the mountains always bake him lovely home-baked bread, and they come to wave us off at the door. So they're very friendly people when he comes to visit them. Stanza 4. These are his memories of his grandfather. My grandfather pacing the garden, benignly dour, a whisky or a woodbine stuck in his claw, a compost of newsprint in the back of his van. You're mad to go live in Bray, he told my father. Somewhere he'd visit on rare and timorous raids. Too close to town to be properly Kilmonton. So, my grandfather pacing the garden. Pacing is walking up and down, usually done when somebody is stressed. Benignly dour. Benignly, gently and harmless. He might look angry in his face, but it's actually benign. It's actually harmless. Dour means having a gloomy or angry or stubborn look on his face. He remembers his grandfather walking up and down the garden angry, and he had a whisky or a woodbine. A woodbine was a type of cigarette stuck in his claw. He describes his grandfather's hand like a claw. I guess because he was living in the mountains and his fingernails were probably dirty and his skin was rough from all the hard work on the farm. He then says there was a compost of newspapers in the back of his van. His grandfather wasn't a very tidy man. All the newspapers were thrown into the back of his van and they were like compost. They were like decomposing. And his grandfather said to his own father, "You are mad to go live in Bray," he told my father. So the poet's father grew up here in the mountains, and sooner or later he wanted to leave that life and move to the town of Bray. And his grandfather didn't like that. He said, "You're mad to go and live in the town of Bray." Somewhere he would visit on rare and timorous occasions. Timorous is timid, shy or fearful. So what we learn here is his grandfather was used to living in the mountains, and very rarely he used to leave the mountains and go to visit the town of Bray. And when he went to visit the town, he was timid, shy and fearful because he didn't trust town people probably. And he used to say that Bray was too close to town to be properly Kilmonton. So Bray is quite near Dublin city. So his grandfather used to say, "Why are you moving to Bray? You know, you're a Wicklow man. Bray is too near town, too near Dublin to be properly called Kilmonton," which is the Irish word for Wicklow. Stanza 5. All this coming back to me in the mountains early one morning, crossing the windy corridor to the Glen of Imal, where school children read acrostics to me of wet and wonderful Wicklow. And driving on down to Hackettstown with my father, we find grandfather's grandfather under an even. Okay, So all these memories of his childhood came back to him in the mountains one morning when he was driving through the Wicklow Mountains with his father through the Glen of Imal. And here we can see the Glen of Imal is a remote valley in the western Wicklow Mountains, where school children read acrostics to me. Because he now is a famous poet, he went to visit some school children in the mountains where his father and grandfather grew up. And the school children made some poems for him called acrostics, a poem in which the first letter spells out a word of a message. And the poems that the children read to him were practicing some alliteration like wet and wonderful Wicklow. And driving on down to Hackettstown with my father, we find my grandfather's grandfather under an even. Okay, so the rest of this stanza, himself and his father are driving through the Wicklow Mountains, and they're going to find his grandfather and his grandfather's grandfather's grave. So stanza 6. Find my grandfather's grandfather under an even gravestone, gone to his Church of Ireland heaven. And his grandfather too, my father maintains, all turned, long since turned to graveyard fodder, just over the county line from their dear old Wicklow. The dirt tracks, twisting lanes and third-class roads, they would have hauled themselves round while they endured. Okay, so they go to find the gravestone of his grandfather and his grandfather's grandfather. They have gone to their Church of Ireland heaven. Church of Ireland means Protestant church. Okay, and his grandfather too, my father maintains. My father maintains. My father believes. They're all turned, long since turned to graveyard fodder. So all these bodies have now turned into the earth, or to fodder, something to feed domestic animals, especially food for cattle, horses and sheep. So basically their bodies have all decomposed and have just turned into the earth. And just over the county line, where their dear old Wicklow, the dirt tracks, twisting lanes and third-class roads, they would have hauled themselves round while they endured. So basically they were buried just over the border of Wicklow and away from the dirt tracks and the twisting roads of Wicklow and the bad roads, the third-class roads. And when they were living there and working hard, they used to haul themselves, pull or drag with effort or force. Everything was done by hand back then. So they had a very, very hard life, the grandfather and the great-grandfather and all of them who died before him. And they had to endure this life. To endure is to suffer something painful or difficult, but suffer it in a patient way. And we come to our final stanza. Before my father and I ever followed the roads, or my mountainy cousins first picked up a lorry, or my grandfather's van ever hit that garage door. So he's thinking of all the generations that came before him and before his grandfather who are dead. Okay, so before my father and I ever followed these roads, my generations came from here, and before my mountainy cousins first picked up a lorry is a spade for digging the ground, or these people died long before my grandfather's van ever hit the garage door, is the story he started off with. So again, the poem is called Chronicle, and it's just putting in order things that happened in the past. And in this case, he's remembering his grandfather and visiting his relatives in the mountains. If you enjoyed this channel and would like to see more poems like this, please subscribe.